Okay, and we should be now recording. So it's week 14, can you believe? And it's the weekly meeting session where we're just going to go through like announcements and quickly review the material of the week and so on. Just in case someone joins us later on, we'll just bring them up to speed at that time. But like I said, I want to be mindful of the time and not keep you if you've got other things coming up. So we'll just make a start at this point, and let me just move on here. So just again, kind of what we're going to be looking, there's a couple of announcements, couple of practical things, and then we'll focus on this week's material. The practical tree, some of you might have heard this already, some of you might not, but if you haven't, I just want to make sure to highlight, because there were so many issues with it, getting it to run. So what I decided to do was that everyone has already actually received full marks for this assignment, practical tree, so the anatomy structures, and I am building, or I actually already have built, but I wanted to do this announcement first, the practical tree again, and now it should work without any hiccups. And I'm going to be releasing it as an extra credit assignment. So any points you earn on that is extra. So it's even if you get just a couple of points, it's worth of grabbing those extra points. But that will be available all the way to the end of the course. But I just wanted to set your mind at ease if you were kind of wondering or concerned that what's going on and how come there were all those issues. We were not actually able to fully chase it. What was the cause? So for that reason, I just had to manually build it again. So that's about the practical tree. In terms of the exam tree, I pretty much have the grades finalized. I'm just checking a couple of last things. If you haven't had a chance to check your exam 2 and practical 2 points already, I really encourage doing those as well, checking those that they're correct, they're what you expected them to be. And then one of the biggest changes that you might have seen is that all coursework from the past and from the future is now open. So if you have anything that you kind of missed, you didn't get a chance to do, or you thought that you didn't do quite as well as you had hoped to do, this is the chance that they're open. It doesn't have to be this week. I know that everyone's got Thanksgiving plans and other things coming up, but when you get a chance before the end of the course, you have a chance to redo those. If it was an assignment where there was limit in terms of the times or how many times you can attempt it, then you might need to contact me first so I can change that. And most of the time I'm able to do that adjustment. Some assignments don't allow, and on those then we have to think of another way how you can bring up points on those. But let me know if there's any issues. You should be able to access those. Also, once you have accessed those, done those, let me know if the score doesn't automatically update to the canvas like it should be. I think it should, but just sometimes there's hiccups when extensions have been put in place. But I'm just going to write to the slide so I remember to say also for the evening that if there was limited number of attempts, you might need to talk to me first. But when do those close? They don't close soon. They close before the semester ends so that I have enough time to finalize the grades. I think at the moment I have marked it as December 13th. I'll have to double check that, and I will make an announcement if there's any changes to that. but just so that I have enough time to finalize your grades, but you don't have to waste your Thanksgiving break or anything to get those done. But of course, the sooner you get those done, you know exactly where you're standing if you want to do anything of the previous work. But there's time, and like I said, this is something that I want to do, so you have a chance to get all of the points that you can get. If you're, especially if you're chasing off a certain grade. Then having a look of this week's assignments, really this and next week are covering the reproductive system. First this week for the males and next week for the females. And in most courses or most schools, these are covered as one chapter or one weekly module because male reproductive system is actually quite simple and quite quick to cover. In female reproductive system, there's a little bit more going on, especially with the hormones and so on. But you'll notice that this week's material is quite a quick one and quite an easy one to go through. So for that reason also, I think that the assignments are quite easy to go through. You have to learn SMART, which is reading the chapter, answering questions. To that you have your quiz and then the anatomic practical. This week's lab is actually a lab that you will complete in Canvas. So that's nothing new that you wouldn't have done before, but something that I just want to make sure that I give proper advice how to complete it. And on this lab, you'll be looking actually an application of the male, what you've learned about male reproductive system in terms of forensic field. So you'll notice that there is assignment, under the assignments, there is, just trying to find highlighter, there is forensic examination of semen as an assignment to do. And once you click on that, you will find that it opens a text description where you have a document that you can download, and that document talks you quite a bit about theory, basics, what goes on in terms of the forensic applications, how can we figure out things about semen, and then you are asked to write a short paragraph or a short couple of sentences of each method that you are introduced to and how to identify those semen samples using those methods. That does require a little bit of independent research, but I really don't want you to spend a lot of time, just a very, very little, that you have a basic idea that what these methods are. And the methods, I've just listed them here just in case. They're all listed in the assignment sheet and in the Canvas. But there's 3 methods. There's actually more that we could do, but 3 methods that we're looking at. And they're fairly well documented, so you can find a lot of information about them. Keep it simple. Remember that I'm simply looking for very, very general description, and there is a grading matrix on the with the assignment. So I encourage you always to look at the grading matrix before, so you know what I'm looking for. So I just want to encourage you that whenever you have the grading metrics available, I would check that as I'm working through the assignment. So I address everything that's needed for whatever grade you're after. If you're after full marks, well, then I encourage you to look what's needed for the maximum point of scores on each of those assignments or those questions. So this should be easy. This should not take you a lot of time. And especially, I want to remind you that in terms of the research, don't go overboard. Of course, if you enjoy, I'm glad that you're researching things. But for the full marks, you really don't need to do a lot of independent research. It is really simply a couple of sentences, a paragraph, where you summarize each of these methods. And like I said, check out the grading matrix for that. That will be very helpful. And I'm not a super tough grader on things like this. So the next thing for us to have a look of is this week's key points from the, and it should say, of course, reproductive system. I'm sorry that has escaped there. So let's find that. Just bear with me. And we're looking especially the male reproductive system. So let me just update that. And share again. So we should be able to see the PowerPoint again. And we'll have a look through the male reproductive system. Like I said, there's not a huge amount of material for us to cover on that, but I want to give a chance, in addition to the lecture videos, to kind of have a quick summary. Before we do that, I do want to mention, though, that some students are at this point, before the Thanksgiving break, starting to get anxious about we're almost at the finish of the course, which is great. You've made it this far, but they're also starting to look at their final grades and starting to panic a little bit. Do not panic. There will be next week we will review, each one of you will review where your grades are standing. All of the work will be updated. And we'll also discuss about various extra credit opportunities that you have if your grade is not exactly where you want it to be. So I really, really don't want you to worry or be nervous, waste your break by being concerned about anything. There will be plenty of opportunities to get your grade where you want it to be. But that's just kind of something to hopefully set your mind at ease. And we'll discuss at that time also about the finals project. Remember, there's extra credit also on that. All other stuff on this weekly meeting is what we've seen before, the tutoring and so on. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to now jump to the slides for this week. And you'll notice again that they don't look exactly like your school's layout, but in the lecture video, they actually do look. So let me just share that. And we should be at the PowerPoint now. So before we make a start of the male reproductive system, I think we need to also talk a little bit about the reproductive system in general. So we'll start with that by looking at that. And there's always some slides that I've actually used in some other contexts, so don't get thrown off if they look a little different from what you were expecting. So I teach many different levels. Really couple of general terms that we need to be familiar with. The gonads refer to the primary sex organs. So we have, of course, testes for males and ovaries for females. This term gonads is something that you might end up seeing being used quite a bit. So something to be aware of. And they do something, or they do various different things, but something that's known as producing gametes. So gametes mean the sex cells. So, of course, sperm or spermatozoa, which is another term sometimes used for sperm, for males, and for the females, of course, the egg cell, often described as ova or oocyte. These are probably a little bit more scientific terms to use. So I just want you to be comfortable if you see those terms being used, gonads, gametes, that you're not going to be thrown off that what are they talking about. In addition to producing sex cells, another important function of the gonads, so either testis or ovaries, is production of the sex hormones. So it's not just the sex cell that we want. We also want to deal with the sex hormones. And there's many reasons why we produce sex hormones. For males, of course, androgens, and for females, it's going to be estrogen and progesterone that we'll be looking. So already now you'll see that male reproductive system is going to be simpler and quicker to go through. So really, it's the sex organs, testes or ovaries, that we're focusing, and everything else other than those are kind of accessory organs. We'll need to know about those, but the business end is either the testes or ovaries, so our gonads. And we're going to start by looking at the male reproductive system, and there's many different ways to go through it. If you are someone who learns by taking notes or drawing diagrams or whatever like that, this is a good chance to use that, because I will be talking you through the male reproductive system by actually going through part by part, adding them to a diagram, which then gives us a complete overview of everything you need to know about male reproductive system. But if you totally hate drawing, hate taking notes, you can just simply watch. I will make the diagram also available on the Canvas material, so you don't have to panic about it. But I find that many learn a little bit better when they take their own notes. So we'll basically know everything that we see on this, but in a more simplified manner. So that's why I have a blank page here, and we're going to start with the primary sex organ for the males, which was, of course, the testes. I'm just thinking, which way shall I draw this? Let's draw it here. So testis is this round, kind of an egg-shaped organ, and I'm going to add a little bit of notes here. Main functions that we have there is, of course, the sperm production, and then we had the hormones for both males and females. And just to keep this diagram a little bit more manageable, I'm going to use a little bit of color coding. Again, if someone's color blind, for example, I get that sometimes with students. Always let me know so I know to use colors that you are able to see, because most of us are able to see at least some of those colors still. So I'm just going to do color coding like that. So testis was the business end function to produce sperm, and second function to produce the sex hormone, which was the testosterone that we'll be looking at. And then everything else that we'll cover on this diagram is going to be accessory organs. So let's have a quick review through those accessory organs and see what's going on in there. So I'm going to jump back to the drawing tools. And we're going to be adding the first structure on top of a testis. There's kind of a thinner, not so solid or not so smooth structure known as epididymis. That's a coiled tube, actually, so it's not just one blob, it's a lot of small tube that's wrapped up together, covering part of the testis surface. And that's actually the location where the sperm is stored, and sperm also remains there to mature until it's ready to leave and do its job. So let's add that to our diagram. And I know that my handwriting is sometimes horrible on this computer, so if something doesn't make sense, let me know. So that's where the sperm is stored and matures. And we can add that again with a color coding so we know what's going on there. So one of my students in a previous class in another school kind of summarized it nice that even sperm needs to go to the school before it's ready to leave to the world. So epididymis is where the sperm that's produced by the testis goes to wait until it is needed, but also waits until it's matured, all of the parts of it have been completed in terms of being ready to now go and do its job. The next structure is a bit of a challenging structure because there's so many names that you might see being used about it. But we're talking about the exact same thing. What is used most commonly in Europe, I think, is vas deferens. But I've seen in America it also being called ductus deferens. Or ductus deferentia. And this is simply a 45 centimeters, so about this length, long muscular tube. And we might be thinking that it's way longer than we think that it should be. But when we follow its track, it actually goes around urinary bladder and so on. So that adds to the length of it. Important thing to notice is that it's a muscular tube. And let's add that to our diagram here. So it leaves from the posterior end and climbs over the urinary bladder, which I will add right now so we don't have to wonder where it is. And I know that my drawing is a little bit messy, but do your best to do a better job than I do. If we have our urinary bladder here, it goes around it. So I'm just gonna redraw some parts that I kind of was messy with. And we're gonna end it here after the urinary bladder, although in reality it doesn't end. There's a next structure that is actually still part of the ductus deferens. But because we have an own name for it, I want to address it separately so that you don't end up wondering that why did we just cut that tube off. It's not that it's not important or it wouldn't matter. I'm just simply trying to cover all of the parts that we need to know. So again, I'm using the color coding vas deferens or ductus deferens or ductus deferentia. It's this long tube coming out from the end of the epididymis, going around the urinary bladder that we see there, and then we end drawing it here. Although the neck structure is still part of the ductus deferens or vas deferens, it's just an expansion of it. So I'm gonna still draw it there, but I'm gonna draw it with a different color again. So let's first or highlight it with a different color. So what we're gonna draw here to the distal end of the ductus deferens is a kind of an enlargement of it. And this enlargement of the ductus deferens is known as ampulla. So it's nothing but an enlarged part of the ductus deferens, kind of a bigger sac there. After that, about 45 centimeters, that was the length of the ductus deferens. I hope this will show up as different. Oh, I didn't mean to do that. Oh well. I hope that it shows up as a different color. I meant to use a highlighter. Let's see if that works better. Here we go. So ampulla is here. And notice that it's different color than from the epididymis. So colors don't matter as long as you code them so that you know what we're talking about. So if you think about it, at this point, sperm must have traveled quite a long distance. 45 centimeters for the size of a structure of a sperm is a long way to go. So even though the sperm that has left the epididymis has been fully nourished and fully ready for this journey, at this point, even though we have this muscular movement of the vas deferens, since it's a muscular tube that helps the sperm to move, it is going to be running out of energy, running out of resources. So for that reason, we're going to now see a bunch of glands that are secreting substances that allow the sperm to be re-energized, re-nourished, so that it can continue its journey. Because we remember, of course, once sperm leaves the male body, that's not the end of the journey. There's quite a ways for sperm to go even at the end of that. So we're going to add the first gland that helps our sperm after the vas deferens. And we're going to add it here. So we're going to draw like two tubes that join together. There's going to be a few other junctions as well. But after the ampulla, there's a branch that joins to this tube that's continuing. And at the end of this branch is going to be our seminal vesicle. And of course, these all are not to the scale, so it's not as big as testis, but I'm just trying to, that we have an understanding that there's a gland. So let's add it here. So seminal vesicle, its function really is to secrete nourishment to the sperm. So we're going to add that note there. Nourish sperm. I'm just going to leave it there because I'm running out of space otherwise to include everything. And again, I'm going to use highlighter as a color coding, but if you have a better way or better idea how you learn, use that. And it's again different from vas deferens, different shade. You don't have to use same colors. I'm just using whatever I have available from the PowerPoint as by default. So now these secretions from the seminal vesicle. Their function is to nourish the sperm, so sperm gets kind of a reboost. It's able to continue its long journey to the end of the male body and then continuing within the female reproductive system. But that's by no means the only gland that we have here. So I'm taking my pen to draw again. And first of all, of course, urinary bladder joins to this same tube here. So remember, on male, we have large portion of the tract shared by the urinary and reproductive system. So both come out from the same tube. And what we'll see is that all of these structures that we've looked at here that are putting their material out to this tube that then joins here, it all goes through a gland known as our prostate. And prostate again contributes various secretions here. But you might have heard that someone has prostate cancer or overgrowth of prostate. That's actually quite common in males over 65. Quite a few of us have that just by chance to look forward, or that's going to happen. But luckily, prostate cancer is not very big to spread, and luckily it's easy to deal with it as well. And again, I meant to take a highlighter, not a pen. So some of the signs of a prostate overgrowth or cancer is that these tubes that go through it start to get squeezed, so they're not able to, for example, urine is not able to pass through this structure anymore as easily. So what we do, we might remove the entire prostate, or we can take a slice away from the prostate, like a pizza slice, that same kind of triangular shape, that opens up the space for these tubes then to travel and empty. There's going to be, you'll be glad to hear, only one more gland that we're going to add to this diagram. And the next gland is after prostate, after we've gotten through with these tubes that you join together through the prostate. And this next gland is our bulbourethral gland. So I'm going to write it here. Another term that's sometimes used to describe this gland is Copworth's gland, and that's after the person who identified it first. And what this gland does, it releases secretions in response to sexual stimulation. So again, if you think by this stage, sperm had already traveled quite a distance. We re-nourished it by giving it nutrient-rich, energy-rich secretions, but we also want to add a little bit of additional material to the semen so that it's easier for the sperm to travel within that mixture of liquids. So that was in response to sexual stimulation. And I'm just going to highlight it, and I'm trying to look for a color that I would not have used too much. Let's use this one. So that's our Copworth's gland. I'm just going to see, is it going to be too dark? I think it's still legible. If it's not, let me know if you want me to clarify any of those terms that we've seen. So bulbourethral gland or Kopper's gland. So now there's no more glands. The rest of the journey is simply for the journey to get out of the human body. Let's draw that. And again, like I said, remember that of course this is not quite to the scale. It's trying to be, but it's a little bit. I noticed that some of my glands are quite huge in comparison to the testes. Testes would be way largest of all that we're going to see. So all of these secretions, also urine from the urinary bladder, all of it goes to our ejaculatory duct, which then changes into urethra when we mix the urine to it. So only the very first part is ejaculatory duct. It changes into urethra as soon as the urine is dumped into there. And I'm going to write on this side just in terms of having enough space to add everything. And I was trying to save a nice color for that so that it's easier to follow. So you remember that ejaculatory duct is going to be only this very first part. And after we dump the contents from the urinary bladder to the same duct, the name changes from the ejaculatory duct to urethra. So urethra carries both urine but also our semen. So a mixture of two things. Depending on how it's used, and it has some consequences, especially for males. After intercourse, there's usually a need to urinate to kind of clean up the tubing and so on and so on. So there's only one more set of structures to add onto our diagram, and then we've covered the entire male reproductive tract. And I'm trying to get a pen. And this is going to be our corpus cavernosum and corpus spongiosum, which are both tissues that then receive a lot of blood flow when there's when the male gets an erection. So in sexual stimulation, that tissue then hardens. So let's add it here. Other times it's kind of emptier from the blood and not as hard. And of course, the different sides, the superior and inferior, are called with different names. But for you guys, as long as you know that they're there, for my purposes, for the lecture videos, that's enough. You might be asked to study them in greater detail on the anatomy videos. So let's add them here. So that's our corpus cavernosum and corpus spongiosum. And I'm going to take another highlighter. I'm just going to try to find a color that I wouldn't have used too much, that wouldn't make it confusing. Let's try this. So this is the tissue like I said, receives rich blood supply during the sexual stimulation, giving the erection. So there it is, the entire male reproductive system, all the parts that you need to know, all the structures, and we've already talked a fair bit about their functions as well. So just kind of as a recap, I'm going to discuss us through it by using the laser pointer. So this male sex organ was our testes, and that's the only sex organ that we have for males. All of these others are accessory organs. So remember that the only sex organs were testes for males and ovaries for females. So we should probably somehow circle it, that we don't forget. I'm just trying to get to a pen. I've got quite a few windows open. So I'm just gonna move this here. So remember, testis is the primary sex organ. Everything else is accessory organs. So we're gonna start our journey from there, provided that I find my laser pointer. Here we are. So what testis did, it had a twofold function. The first function was to produce sex cells, which is going to be sperm in the case of the male, of course. The second function was to produce hormones. In case of males, that's going to be testosterone. And that's the two functions of the testes. Once the sperm has been produced, it travels to the epididymis, which is coiled up thin tube on the surface of the testes, covering it partially. And sperm goes there not just to be stored, but also to mature until it is ready and until it is needed to leave the scrotum. Then it travels up the vas deferens or ductus deferentia or ductus deferens, depending on who you ask, 3 different names. And this was a muscular tube about 45 centimeters long, so much longer than the journey from here to here. It's because it has to go over the urinary bladder and then land behind the urinary bladder. And the very last part of the ductus deferens was an expansion of this tube known as ampulla. So it's not a gland, it's just an expansion of this ductus deferens. This is the stage where we start to secrete various secretions to the sperm. First of all, our seminal vesicle secreted secretions that are very rich in nutrients for the sperm to gain energy, resources again. And in addition, we had our bulbourethral gland or Copworth's gland, which then secreted secretions in response to sexual stimulation, kind of more liquid, more resources for the semen to be produced. Both of these ducts, so both ejaculatory duct, which was the junction of the ampulla, and our seminal vesicle, so ejaculatory duct at this part, and also the tract from the urinary system, so our urethra, they join together, and for the rest of the journey, we talk about urethra. So at this point also, if we needed to urinate, and we had a look of the urinary system earlier, this duct would be shared for the urinary system as well. Well, the duct continues all the way to the end of the penis, and we remember that penis was surrounded by corpus cavernosum and corpus spongiosum, which were tissues that receive rich blood supply during sexual stimulation. As it fills with blood and hardens, male gets an erection. So those are all the parts that we need to know for the male reproductive tract. And everything else is kind of either review or we add a little bit of more information about the hormones, but that's about it. So we've spent a lot of time on this diagram, but if you drew it, if you made notes, you've covered most of the course. So I'm going to go through the same structures just with this diagram showing, so you remember our testes, the site where sperm and hormones were produced. Epididymis on top of it. Then we have our vas deferens or ductus deferentia or ductus deferens. Traveling all the way to the end until it reaches ampulla, which was an expansion of vas deferens. At this point, we have our ejaculatory duct, which then changes into our urethra after that. We also received secretions from our seminal vesicle here. These secretions were rich in nutrients to help sperm to make its journey. And of course, we then had the urinary bladder here. These two went through a structure known as our prostate. And we discussed how prostate, it does give secretions to this process, but often there might be an overgrowth of the prostate in older men with age that has an effect. For example, the urination can have an effect also on sex life. So what we do, we either remove it, normally partial removal is enough, cutting a slice of it to release these ducts to go through it without restriction, but sometimes it is necessary to remove it completely. We also had one more gland here, and that was our vulvourethral gland or Copworth's gland, depending on who you ask. This gland right here. And that connected then, of course, to our urethra. And the final part that we added to the diagram was the tissues that were, I think the term spongiosum is a good for describing them. They get filled with blood in sexual stimulation. So those were our corpus cavernosum and corpus spongiosum. So that's the male reproductive tract. There's a couple of other things I've spent a lot of time on, developmental biology. I wanted to mention a few words about the scrotum where the testes are located. So scrotum is this kind of a pouch-like sac. Another term that I would like us to be familiar with. I'm just going to take a highlighter because I think that there's not everything on these slides is vital, but there's few things that I want to point out. So I'm going to highlight the most important. So remember, scrotum, a sac of skin, a sac of where the testes are located. Testes are located within the scrotum so that they're not in quite as warm environment as the human's core temperature is. So that provides a little bit cooler environment for the sperm to develop, which is optimal for sperm development. However, on a cold day or in cold water, the scrotum has an option to raise up, go closer to the body so that it doesn't cool off too much. And this process of scrotum climbing up is thanks to a muscle known as dartos muscle. This is a smooth muscle that pulls the scrotum closer to the body when necessary. Of course, if it's a super warm day, our body heat is high, scrotum then decreases. I'm just going to throw this fact here, even though we're not really discussing in greater detail. Do remember that both males and females during the embryonic development actually start with a template for both reproductive systems. And then during the embryonic development, depending on what hormones are secreted, one of these remains, another one disappears. So that's why there's some similarities on these reproductive tracts. And that's why if there's developmental issues, we might end up seeing remains. The other important thing that I want to mention, the difference between the terms, and for this I'm actually going to take a pen because this is something that, again, I would like you to be familiar with. The difference between the sex from gender. So we remember that sex is, of course, what's biologically coded into us. So in your DNA, you do get defined that are you a male or a female. However, gender is what you identify as. So gender is more of a socio-cultural creation, your own feeling where you belong and which gender you want to be considered as, or if you don't want to be considered as either gender or something in between. Whereas sex is the term that we use in biology. So I have worked a lot with patients who have gone through transition process, and in these cases, we respect their gender, but we have to remember that the sex, if the transition has happened after puberty, like we normally don't do much earlier, they are going to have, for example, if they've gone from male to female, they're going to have male organs, male body. And I'm not just talking about reproductive tract. When we're comparing size of heart to what's normal size of the heart, we have to remember that this is probably going to be better to be compared to the male reference values. So just a little thing that I want us to be familiar with. The next slide, I have a bunch of slides about male reproductive tract, just highlighting some of the things that we have already discussed. We see the scrotum nicely here, and we can also see the muscles pulling them up. This is really nice diagram in showing the urinary bladder and how the vas deferens goes over and behind it. This is why the vas deferens is so long in length. A little bit more about the testis divided in lobules that are then filled with a smaller tube. This all in the lecture video is covered to the detail we need to know. But notice at the top of it, we have our epididymis, which was just coiled tubule on the top of the testis. I think that this diagram a little bit overemphasizes the size of epididymis. The testis looks a little small, but overall it does a good job of highlighting this point. Another diagram showing especially well our corpus cavernosum and corpus spongiosum, the tissues that swell around our urethra, around the external part of the reproductive tract for males, so our penis. Notice how there's actually 3 different groups of tissues there, rich blood supply there. The next one is just kind of, I'm not expecting you to memorize or know this, but I do a lot of reading of what's happening in the field of science, and you wouldn't normally think that mathematics and biology go together, but apparently they do. A group in Holland, I think, calculated an equation for a perfect sperm. So how efficient sperm is can be calculated by considering various characteristics. Really, this is not useful for us in any other sense than if we think that how could we make the issues that many couples face with the reproductive issues, for example, not being able to conceive, less troublesome. Going to these tests can be quite hard for some couples. So if we have this formula, maybe we can do applications with magnification things to the phones that we can calculate how well the sperm of an individual works without having to go to the testing side. But that's still work in progress. Few more diagrams showing the pretty much everything that we covered earlier on, but also related to the other body structures that we might have seen. I want to say a few words about sperm. We're not going to spend too much time on that, but there's few key words that we need to know. And the first one is, of course, the spermatogenesis. So production of sperm is known as spermatogenesis. If you think of the part genesis, that's the creation of something. So in this case, creation of the sperm. And what else? Let's have a look of let's have a look of the structure of the sperm. I'm not going to go into the whole cell division process. I think that should have been covered in the general bio courses. I can include a link to those on the lecture videos. But what I want to show is only part of this diagram. And the part of this diagram that I want to highlight is this end product that we're going to see. We're going to look at the different parts of the sperm from there. And let's start with the head of the sperm cell. So head is the part of the sperm that includes the nucleus, so the genetic material that the male contributes to the development of a new individual. So you remember egg cell has half of the genetic material, the sperm cell has half. Once we combine that, that's the full individual's genetic makeup. In addition, the head part contains various enzymes that help the sperm to penetrate within the female egg. And we'll see this process when we discuss a bit further after the reproductive tracts. The mid piece of the sperm cell is where there's a lot of mitochondria. And if you remember the function of mitochondria from your general bio, you remember that mitochondria are of course, generally known as the powerhouse of the cell. That's where most of the energy of the cell is produced. For the longest of time, we said that was the key site where energy is produced. We're now finding out that small amount of energy can be produced elsewhere in the cell as well. But a lot of mitochondria in the mid piece for production of energy so that the tail can then wiggle and do its job in terms of moving the sperm along. So this is a flagellum. You might remember that term being used as structures that come out of the cell, help with movement through microtubules. An interesting fact about sperm that I think is worth keeping in mind, a sperm cell can live about 3 days outside the male body within the female body. So that's the time that the sperm has to find the egg cell. So it does live a little bit longer than we probably normally would initially assume. The next and last thing about male reproductive tract is the hormonal control of the male reproduction. I'm trying to get a different highlighter. So we end up again with the same structures that we've seen being important already in the past. So the ultimate goal is that we are able to produce the sex hormones, and we're going to look at the control of the production of the sex hormones and, of course, the sex cells from the testes. We're going to look at the control of that next. And we're going to have this bunch of structures that we've seen before: hypothalamus and pituitary gland. Sometimes hypothalamus and pituitary gland, because they're so closely together, are grouped as a hypothalamic pituitary axis. So that's something that you might end up seeing at times. So what hypothalamus does, it secretes the gonadotropin releasing hormone, which is abbreviated as GnRH. So gonadotropin releasing hormone. So the term gonad on that should ring bells to us. That's, of course, the reproductive organ, and in males, that would be the testes. The part of the anterior pituitary gland is to release follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone. And we're not going to spend as much time on those for the males because these are going to be really, really important on females. But I did want to mention them, and just for the sake of clarity, so I'm circling that gonadotropin releasing hormone from our hypothalamus, and from our pituitary gland, then follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone. And of course, then our gonads. So testis is involved in this process as well, since that's the one that gets affected. If you are interested, I'm going to mention a couple of words. Luteinizing hormone really acts on the sperm production of the testes, helps with the testosterone production, also sperm production, whereas the follicle stimulating hormone, more about the maturation and responding to the testosterone, also plays a role in the sperm production. But remember that testes will be also involved here. So I think that that's in terms of the hormonal control quite a bit. Remember again, we saw in our previous chapters the homeostatic control loop. The reason why it's so important is that we see it everywhere, and we also see here negative feedback. So controlling the concentration of the testosterone in the male body. Next, I think I have, there's just the relationship of the pituitary glands and the hypothalamus. Next, I wanted to show the testosterone levels throughout the lifetime of an individual. So what we see here is that early in the development, there is a high amount of testosterone. Early months before birth. At this point, we're choosing the sex that the individual will get. So you remember when I mentioned that most of us, or all of us, initially start during embryonic development with both a template for both systems. So this surge of the sex hormones helps during the embryonic development for one of these to develop, other one not to develop. And during the first year or so, there is also some sex hormones in terms of the testosterone on male, a little spike, but it's not quite as high. By the time we reach the puberty, the amount of testosterone climbs very high. And this is a big change because we get our secondary sexual characteristics, but also I've always said that hormones are one thing that if you change one thing, that then has a significant effect on everything else, that I avoid messing with this if I can. And what we end up finding is that during this period of puberty, this change in hormone levels can be quite a lot for the individual to manage. So there might be a little bit of physiological growing pains in terms of that. And by the time we reach 60 or a bit after that, of course, the testosterone levels start to decrease. I think these days we see a lot of ads about also male testosterone treatments for replacing that as that starts to decrease. For the longest of time, this was mainly aimed for females after menopause, the hormone replacement therapies. But now we're starting to see that being advertised more for males as well. And that really concludes all that I wanted to say about this chapter. So as you saw, the male reproductive system is a simple system if you compare to a lot of other things. Really, probably the most important part there to remember is gonna be the drawing that we did together, which shows all the important parts. There's just a little bit of other stuff, like I mentioned, with the hormonal control mainly, and the sperm, and so on. And now I should be able to jump back to our PowerPoint of the weekly session. So let's get that open. So as we saw, we have now covered the chapter on male reproductive system. I already mentioned that don't be panicky. Don't let that ruin your Thanksgiving break. I'm getting some emails. Even the course directors are getting some emails from students who are really stressed out about their grades on all courses. Do remember that I want to make this course as easy and as enjoyable as possible for you. So I'm not going to try to catch you out. There's not going to be anything that would prevent you from getting the grade that you want to get. So there's going to be plenty of extra credit opportunities as well. And once we return from the break, there is going to be time when I'm going to encourage you to review your grades. You'll be able to look exactly where you're standing. However, if you're really eager to do something during the break, all of the assignments are open for the rest of the semester. Also, the assignments from the previous semester or previous weeks are there as well if you want to go back and do those. If it's an assignment where we have a limited number of attempts, you might need to contact me so I can reset your attempt so you're able to reattempt something. We'll talk about the finals project at that time. There's the tutoring, like I've said in the past, but really the most important message from me is that don't worry about the practical 3. There will be extra credit option of that made of, and all of the assignments are open if you want to go and work on any of those. But that's really all that I had for this week. Don't go overboard with the lab component for this forensic examination of semen. I'm not expecting a great complete literature review, just a couple of sentences, look at the grading matrix. That's all I need. And that's all I have for this week. I really appreciate you joining me and sticking with me. It took a little longer than I thought, but still shorter. I think it shows how this chapter is not quite as heavy to cover. I hope you have a good Thanksgiving, whether you celebrate Thanksgiving or not. I hope you have a good break and a chance to relax a little bit. I know it's been a very, very busy semester, and hopefully you'll get to also spend some time with your loved ones, whether it's in person or whether it's virtually. If you have any questions, this is a good time to give me a shout out, but otherwise that's all I have. Thank you. Have a good break. And that covers really everything that we had set out to cover. So I'm going to stop the recording as well. Remember, I'm always here to help if you have any questions. I really encourage also looking at these videos, weekly meeting videos, in addition to announcements. That's it. Thank you.